reduced to the level of a donkey. Meanwhile, Guilford is still keeping his eyes peeled for the blacksmith who destroyed his precious sword. Behind one of the trees in the bushes, we see a hooded man with an eagle on his arm. He places a rolled-up paper in the compartment strapped to the eagle's leg, and afterward, sends the eagle to deliver his message. The eagle flies swiftly and reaches the Broaden Kingdom's treasury in no time. When the bird delivers the message, it stays on the window while the receiver talks with someone, admitting that the event they were worried about has finally occurred. While burning the paper, the man reveals that the so-called dreaded event is the fact that the Barca's kingdom has sent off an exploration team. This new development makes things difficult for him, because half of his country's finances come from intermediary trade. However, because they are in friendly relations with the Barca's kingdom, they can't openly try to restrain them from establishing a new trade route. The old man who's been speaking so far asks the other man in the room if he understands what he means. An ominous smile appears on the hooded person's face, and he assures the old man that he understands him very well. This man's real name is Kira, and he's the 89th ranked player in the game, who also happens to be one of the deadliest assassins in Arpedia. Meanwhile, back in the woods, we see an exhausted Zig lying on the floor and wondering how his situation got this bad. Even though he looks like he's about to pass out, Legas doesn't seem to care. She addresses him as slave number 1 and orders him to get up so he can set up her tent. Hearing her say such things, Zig just remains on the floor and curses her in his mind. Legas says she needs to log out for a while, so she orders him to set up the tent and go get their food while she returns. Before leaving, she wants to make sure that Zig understands his duty, so she asks him if he's got everything she said. Zig doesn't say anything, so she gets upset and orders him to answer her while calling him a slave. At this point, Zig finally responds by warning her to not push her luck, and asks her if she really takes him for a slave. From the look on his face, it's pretty clear that my man has some horrible plans for this scammer. In the end, Zig snaps and declares that he can't take her mistreatment any longer. But before he can do anything to get his revenge, the annoying con artist calls out for the guards like a damsel in distress. The moment Zig hears this, he quickly turns around and crouches down to inspect the ground and find the best spot for her tent. He continues to murmur while working, and when the scammer sees this, she begins to gloat. She tells him that he should have just behaved from the beginning and expects everything to be set properly before she returns. Finally, she logs out of the game, and while her avatar is still disappearing, Zig begins to shed tears. He thinks about how much crap he's taking from her, just because he can't afford to not participate in this quest. He curses out loudly, but eventually gets to work because that's the best he can do. A while later, he's done with everything as instructed. He's set up the tent, made a fire, and even prepared a suitable meal for them to eat. While he's eating, he wonders why he's suffering so much after getting caught up with a con artist. He's still drowning his sorrow by stuffing himself with food when someone suddenly calls out to him. The owner of the voice drops a damaged dagger in front of Zig and reveals that he heard he's the best person to ask for repairs in Balden. It's times like these that Zig wishes he didn't have such a reputation. He looks up at the guy, and he has some men with him who appear to be a bunch of mercenaries. The guy has a scar on his face, and he's holding a pretty big axe that makes him look threatening. He bluntly tells Zig to fix the broken dagger for him, and the blacksmith recognizes the men as people from the Red Tiger Company. Zig, who just wants to enjoy his meal, asks the Scarface guy why he needs the repair so urgently. In response, the guy smirks at Zig tauntingly. He claims that he heard Zig is Balden's king of repairs, but admits that the blacksmith doesn't even look like he's confident in his skills. You see, Mr. Scarface over here doesn't actually need the dagger fixed. He plans to nitpick as much as possible, and then drag Zig in front of their leader, who happens to be none other than our new father-in-law, Guilford. After much hesitation, Zig finally gets up and decides to take a look at the damaged equipment. He places his food on the floor and thinks about how annoying it is that he couldn't enjoy his meal in peace. He picks up the damaged dagger and uses his grain skill to start working. A few moments later, Zig hands Scarface the dagger after fixing it. The guy can't believe his eyes, because he didn't actually expect his Twilight dagger to get fixed. What's even more unbelievable is that the dagger is back to 100% durability, just like it was when it was new. To be honest, Scarface and the other men are so baffled by this result that they forget about their plan to take our hero to Guilford. Instead, they all inspect the dagger, trying to make sure that their eyes aren't playing tricks on them. One of them admits that the condition of the dagger is absolutely perfect, and the other points out how the shiny equipment looks just the way the rumors say it should. Scarface is so overjoyed to see his dagger looking brand new that he starts to doubt that Zig is the same guy who destroyed their leader's sword. Meanwhile, Zig, who's lying in a hammock and trying to read 50 Shades of Grey, politely asks them to leave if they don't have anything else for him to fix. He tells them that he's in the middle of reading, and then for some reason, he calls Scarface an old man. The term seems to have really upset the guy, because my dude immediately snaps at our hero for being rude. He begins to rant non-stop, and claims that he's never seen someone act so nonchalantly after destroying someone else's weapon. He finds Zig's behavior very shameless and is so offended by his statement that he breaks the newly repaired dagger in a fit of rage. Scarface then clears the air about his age, explaining that he's not an old man, but actually someone around the blacksmith's age. Zig appears to be getting on the guy's nerves on purpose because he calls him an old man once again. But before he can finish his statement, the guy cuts him off and insists that he isn't old. Even if he didn't want to take Zig to Guilford anymore, he's probably changed his mind after receiving such insults. He tells Zig to follow him immediately and threatens to beat him up if he refuses. It's at this point that Zig realizes what's going on, so he closes the manual and reveals that he remembers these people. He gets down from the hammock and identifies them as the men from the bakery, and once again calls them old out of spite. Scarface continues to insist that he isn't old, but Zig just asks them if they're all still upset because he bought all the biscuits. Hearing this, Scarface is beyond offended. He grabs his axe and prepares to teach Zig a lesson for suggesting that the Red Tiger Company would get mad over something so trivial. Even if Scarface has more serious beef with Zig, the other members of the Red Tiger Company all hide their faces shamefully, because this is definitely the main reason they were searching for our hero. Either way, their motives don't really matter to Zig, because he just happened to be looking for someone to take out his anger. And now, Scarface and his friends have presented him with the perfect opportunity to do so. He points his sword at them and confidently challenges them to come fight him. But for someone with such a big mouth, Zig's fighting skills are incredibly appalling. We see him tied up with a big bump on his head, implying that he was pretty much subdued without putting up a fight. In any case, the men take him to their camp where they present him to Guilford. As the Red Tiger Company surrounds him, Zig tries to argue that ganging up is cheating, but it's not like anyone gives a single fuck. Guilford interrupts his nagging and promises to overlook things and forgive him if he apologizes sincerely. But of course, instead of taking the wise decision, Zig proves stubborn once more and insists that he did nothing wrong. He claims that he waited in line for his turn and paid for the biscuits, so what's there for him to apologize for? On top of that, he curses at Guilford, but the leader calmly explains that he's not even talking about the biscuits. Zig is shocked to hear this, so he asks why they're holding him captive anyway. He claims that ever since he started playing the game, he's never harmed or offended anyone else. Hearing him say this strikes a nerve in Guilford's head, and he's really annoyed that Zig thinks he's actually innocent. He claims that tying the blacksmith up won't be enough, so he orders his men to set him free, confusing our hero on what they're planning. As you'd guess, he wasn't actually set free. Instead, the men are in fact preparing for his execution. Zig suddenly looks into the sky and sees Sir Guilford of the Storm leaping into the air. The scene terrifies our hero because he's probably about to get divided by two. However, when Guilford slams his weapon on the ground, an explosion follows, and it appears Zig knows what's going on because he's still terrified. An item with just a single point in attack power shouldn't be able to produce so much force, and when the perspective switches to Guilford, we see him holding the item called the Stick of Love. The man then walks menacingly towards Zig and reveals that he's going to personally teach the blacksmith some manners. After leaping into the air once again, he announces that it's time for some lessons in discipline. The leader of the Red Tiger Company swings the Stick of Love at Zig and generates something that looks like a massive inferno. It blows our hero back, and he struggles to stay on his feet. He finds it strange that Guilford would refer to this as a discipline class, because he knows that the old man just wants to take out his anger on someone else. Before Zig can even think about dodging or running away from the fight, the huge blast from Guilford's stick hits him in the middle of his chest. The dust settles, and we see our hero lying nearly unconscious in a small crater caused by the explosion. Both the Stick of Love and Zig's body are burning with some fresh smoke that gives us an idea of the power behind the attack. Guilford stands over him and reveals that he didn't even put all of his strength into the attack, and he's pretty disappointed that Zig couldn't take the hit standing. Disappointed at the result, the man decides to set a condition for our hero. He promises to let him go free, but only if he's able to touch a single hair on his body during the lesson. Even though he's taken a lot of damage, Zig's big mouth only gets bigger, and he starts to get back up while calling Guilford a stubborn boomer. He calls the old man's conditions crap, and labels him as a cocky bastard for thinking he can never get hit by a low-level blacksmith. Zig then takes his sword and slowly gets back on his feet, clearly pissed at how much he's being looked down upon. But you see, he has already suffered so much damage that his health is down to just 10 points. Regardless, he gets up and charges at Guilford with his sword. He screams as he runs toward the leader of the Red Tiger Company, but Guilford effortlessly deflects it with the Stick of Love. Zig doesn't relent and continues to swing his sword at Guilford, but the big guy keeps deflecting all of his attacks. The two keep clashing weapons until Guilford eventually manages to push back our hero. However, Zig is determined to hit him as well, so he manages to stay on his feet despite the overwhelming attacks. Guilford admits that Zig isn't bad for a beginner and even notices that he has a peculiar talent for fighting. However, he still believes that Zig's talent isn't up to the point where he can overcome their difference in levels, especially in a game like Arpedia where your rank is everything. But even with all the odds stacked against him, our hero continues to fight. He charges at Guilford again, and leaps into the air until he uses an incredibly powerful attack to destroy the Stick of Love. After Zig surprisingly destroys the Stick of Love, we find out that he achieved this by using the arm break skill, which he learned from Carwin's manual. This special skill allows him to destroy any armaments or ores by simply targeting the gaps existing in the material. The prerequisite to learning this skill is to train one's grain skill up to rank 7, and it appears that today, this is exactly what our hero has done. We see a flashback of when Zig was rudely interrupted from enjoying his meal. It appears that it was the same time he acquired this skill, because just when he was putting his bowl down, a tab popped up and informed him that his grain skill had become rank 7. In addition, he was also able to learn a new skill, the arm breaker. The panel cuts back to the heated fight between Zig and Guilford, and we see the epic scene where our hero leaps into the air and uses all of his might to destroy the Stick of Love. As the item shatters into several pieces, Guilford can't believe his eyes because he doesn't understand how Zig could break his weapon. While the big guy stares in bewilderment, my boy concludes that this is the first time he has seen a skill that can break other players' weapons. After such an awesome display, Zig proceeds to do something both shocking and incredibly weird. He grabs Guilford by the shoulders, and as he leans in, he tells the big guy to get a piece of his mind. Zig plans to execute a powerful headbutt, which he probably thinks will knock Guilford out or something. But his plan goes terribly wrong when the old man slips and tilts too far back. As a result, what was supposed to be a knockout headbutt ended up becoming a very awkward and unexpected kiss on the lips. As the two men lock lips, their eyes widen in horror and disbelief. The other members of the Red Tiger Company have different expressions on their faces as they watch the unbelievable spectacle before them. While Scarface finds the embarrassing mistake amusing, one of his colleagues watches it like a movie. Another one is flustered, and the last guy just barfs a rainbow as a metaphor for what we're all thinking. They're not the only ones taken aback by the scene, because even the animals in the forest gasp upon seeing the two men kiss. As you'd expect, Guilford is outraged that Zig would subject him to such embarrassment, so he yells in anger and vows to kill the blacksmith. While the man expresses his murderous intentions, Zig is still shaken by what the fuck just happened. He's very embarrassed and disappointed that his first kiss was with an old man, and he falls to his knees as the embarrassment washes over him. While he's wallowing in humiliation and exhaustion, the mercenaries of the Red Tiger Company all try their best to hold back their leader from ripping the blacksmith apart. They remind him that he has to keep the promise he made to Zig. But at this point, Guilford doesn't even care about keeping his word. He just wants them to let him go so he can tear him a new one. While Guilford continues to argue with his men, Scarface walks up to Zig. He admits that our boy isn't too shabby after all, and offers him a purple potion as a gift. This purple liquid is actually a high elixir, which recovers a player's entire health. Scarface admits that no one expected the low-rank blacksmith to get a single hit against their leader, but he proved everyone wrong. He's intrigued by Zig's move, and asks him what skill he used to destroy the Stick of Love. Our hero accepts the potion, and Scarface reveals that it's his first time seeing a skill that destroys a weapon. The mercenary is very curious about it, and asks our boy if this skill is exclusive to blacksmiths. At this point, Zig is already big-headed with all the praise and attention. He clears his throat, and snobbishly tells Scarface that he can't reveal anything specific about the skill to anyone. He then proceeds to gulp down the elixir, and while he's at it, the still curious mercenary asks him if he has joined a guild. He claims that Guilford is actually pretty fond of Zig, and suggests that the blacksmith join the Red Tiger Company. Our hero doesn't say anything until he's finished the potion and replenished his energy, before wiping the excess off his face and expressing his concerns about such an idea. He reminds Scarface that it wasn't long ago when him and his friends beat him to a pulp, but now they want him inside their guild out of nowhere, so Zig calls Scarface shameless for even suggesting something so ridiculous. In response, the mercenary laughs nervously and admits that the situation could have been handled better. He also points out that Zig isn't blameless either, since he was the one who broke their master's sword and ran away. On top of that, he kept calling Scarface an old man, which didn't really help anyone. But regardless of all that transpired, the mercenary is willing to call it even. Even after such a gesture, our hero refuses to make peace. He denies destroying Guilford's sword, and claims that he's never destroyed anyone's weapon while repairing it. While he's still denying, a thought flashes across his mind and he suddenly remembers accidentally destroying Guilford's sword. Zig finally admits that he was wrong, and makes peace with the mercenaries using a firm handshake. He finally agrees to call it even, and in his excitement, he almost calls Scarface an old man once again. Fortunately, he manages to hold his tongue and decides to call him older brother instead. Scarface accepts it, but Guilford is still very pissed. He's still being restrained by his men, but he demands to know whose permission Scarface is using to make peace with the bloody blacksmith. Zig just laughs tauntingly and casually apologizes to Guilford for the incident with his sword. However, it turns out that the dude isn't even mad about the sword anymore and angrily tells Zig that the incident with repairs isn't his problem. Guilford is so angry that he can't even make a complete sentence, so he just screams instead. The next morning, we see two guys having breakfast together and one of them complaining bitterly about the bad food. He asks the other person why it's so bad, and the guy just advises him to lower the sense of taste to the minimum in his settings before eating. He explains that since they have no stamina items, the least they can do is manage the terrible tasting food. Just then, Legas approaches them. It appears that she's been eavesdropping on their conversation and now plans to scam them too. The con artist pretends to be very concerned and points out that the guys have run out of all their consumables. Suddenly, she reveals a gold apple from her cloak and tells the two men that they probably need something like this fruit. The men are astonished when they see the golden apple and immediately start longing for it. Legas claims that the fruit is very special and tells them that for their sake, she'll be selling it to them for only 1,000 gold, even though it's supposed to be worth 10,000. The men are immediately desperate to benefit from the so-called discount. They request 4 golden apples, and the next thing they know, there's a small crowd of people surrounding Legas, who all want to avail the same offer. They start to argue about who got there first, and compete heavily for the right to give Legas their money. After another successful day of scamming people, Legas returns to her camp with a bag full of gold. She holds it against her face and thinks about how she had another good day at the office. When she returns, we see that the so-called golden apples are just regular apples that she made our hero paint over with gold color. He's still doing her bidding, because he feels like the corrupt soldier will remove him from the quest if he doesn't. Of course, it doesn't mean that his opinion about the woman has changed. He calls her vicious and wonders how she can go to such lengths to scam the others. In response, Legas decides to tell Zig something, claiming that he might not know it because he's still young. She claims that everything in the world moves because of money and reveals that the thing you need to rise up isn't levels or skills. Rather, she believes that one's inventory and bank account are what actually matter. After sharing this with him, she tells him to hurry up and finish painting the rest. Legas starts walking away and promises not to order him around anymore once he's done with this task, before leaving him to it and heading out to get some herbs. As she walks away, Zig begins to wonder why she's so obsessed with money. Even after what she told him, he still doesn't get it at all. He then paints a smiley face on one of the apples and looks pretty smug about his creation. He lifts the apple in the air, feeling proud of his painting skills, and then names it as Wilson. Like the loner that he is, Zig prefers to have a painted fruit as his companion, rather than actual people. Suddenly, a small portal opens in front of him and a weapon flies out towards his face. He quickly uses Wilson to block the attack, and when he takes a closer look at the weapon, he's surprised to see that it's a kunai. Zig doesn't seem to know the actual name and assumes that it's called a shuriken. Either way, he quickly realizes that they're under attack. Guilford announces this to everyone around and orders all combatants to take defensive positions. Unfortunately, before they can organize themselves, more kunai are hurled at them by a hooded man who suddenly appears in the sky. He continues to attack, and when Guilford spots him, he tries to blast him away with his skill. However, this mysterious killer uses a strange technique to disappear and dodge the hit. Guilford is stunned to see this, and while he's still in a daze, the assassin reappears behind him to land a surprise attack. The mercenary doesn't sense his presence and wonders if the assassin is using the user death effect. Just when the assassin is about to stab Guilford in the back, Zig arrives and swiftly uses his arm break skill to destroy the killer's blade. Afterward, he smirks at the old man and informs him that he now owes him his life. Guilford refuses to admit it and scoffs instead, claiming that the assassin's attack wouldn't have damaged him anyway. Even though he puts on a tough facade, the man is worried because he knows that he couldn't even sense the attacker when he was behind him. For that to be the case, he wonders if the hooded man's presence concealment skill is higher than his detection. As the murdered players start to disappear from the game, the mysterious hooded figure lands on a rock. Guilford asks the person to reveal his identity while pointing his sword at the intruder. A psycho smile appears on the assassin's face, and as another weapon starts to materialize in his hand, he reveals that he's an assassin who received the first-class title. He also reveals that he's the man who leads the Black Crescent Moon. Some of the other warriors start to tremble in fear when they hear this. They know that the Black Crescent Moon is a famous contractor guild, and their leader's presence on this expedition can only mean a single thing. The assassin hears the terrified warriors murmuring, so he decides to be more specific and confirm their assumptions by revealing that he is Kira, the rank 89 assassin. We then see a paper that contains the exploration team attack quest. Here, we find out that the mandatory quest is for them to overcome the assassins, who are trying to interfere with the trade between the Barkas Kingdom and the North Arc. In addition, they have to complete this quest and reach the North Arc within the designated period. Hearing the assassin confirm this, the warriors become even more afraid. They don't want to believe that the hooded guy in front of them is the vicious Kira. One of them forces himself to believe that Kira is lying, but when he sees him take the battle stance of an assassin, he accepts the truth. Kira opens his arms and taunts the men to the point that they immediately conclude that they're all going to die. They're all terrified and confused because they don't know what to do. However, Kira suddenly eases the tension when he gestures for them to keep quiet and reveals that he hasn't come to kill everyone. As unbelievable as that might seem, he explains that his true objective for coming is to stop them from going ahead with their quest. He wants to keep them in one place so that he can obtain the Patriot in the Shadows title. Kira tells them that as long as they all give up, he can end things without having to get his hands dirty. The assassin then tries to convince them to give up, but he's interrupted by one of the people. The guy wearing an eye patch suddenly confronts Kira and warns him not to mess with the wrong crowd. Mr. Eyepatch is really upset because he spent a lot of money to participate in this quest, and now someone is trying to stop him. He asks Kira if he's going to refund all of his investment, or if he's going to pay back all the money he has spent. The crazy assassin processes what the guy just said, and pretends to be concerned for a moment. Then suddenly, he smiles again and shoots an arrow into the guy's neck. Guilford is shocked when he sees this, and as Mr. Eyepatch starts to disappear from the game, Kira makes it clear to every one of them that he hasn't come here to bargain. He explains that he's only talking to them to make the encounter more formal. Still standing on the rock, Kira addresses the remaining people and informs them that hundreds of his followers are currently surrounding them. He then reveals that if they don't give up, him and his men will just have to eliminate all of them. The assassin makes the bold statement and asks them if they now understand the situation they're in. While he's talking, Guilford can't help but think that the assassin is bluffing. He can certainly feel the presence of his followers, but he's sure that they're not in hundreds in number. However, he knows that there are still many of them hiding in the forest, and he fears that things will get even more difficult if the NPCs die. Seeing that the odds are against them, Guilford comes up with a plan, and quickly starts using hand signs behind his back to communicate with one of the other players. Using his finger, he tells the person that he's going to provoke Kira so he can draw his attention. While he's doing that, he wants the person, whose name is Hyung-seok, to cover the field of view from the forest with a magical barrier. Hyung-seok instantly understands the assignment and starts waiting for Guilford's signal. Guilford then uses his fingers to count down from 3, but while he's still at 2, Zig suddenly starts talking to Kira. He claims that Kira's first-class title is a lie, and suggests that he's more likely just a petty thief. When Guilford hears Zig say this, he immediately uses his hand sign to tell Hyung-seok to abort the mission. Without a drop of fear, Zig challenges Kira by pointing his sword at him and asking what kind of assassin would reveal himself and lecture people. He claims that if he were truly a first-class assassin, he would have been killing people before they even noticed. Seeing our hero's bold attitude, Kira immediately recognizes him as the blacksmith from before who destroyed his weapon. Kira is still thinking about this when Zig challenges him to fight one-on-one in a respectable fashion to prove he's really a ranker. Our boy continues to lash out at the assassin, calling him a coward for acting cheaply and pretending to be tough when he's hiding his followers in the bushes. At this point, Kira is getting fed up with Zig's insults. He calls the blacksmith a bug-like bastard with an annoying voice and tells him that he shouldn't get ballsy around him just because he got lucky enough to break his weapon earlier. Kira calls Zig a noob and instantly orders his followers to kill the blacksmith. Just like before, a weapon is thrown at our hero, but he managed to deflect it easily. With a cocky smile on his face, he almost starts to gloat about how low the attacks are. However, before he can finish boasting, many more projectiles are hurled at him and the rest. The moment Guilford sees the incoming danger, he yells for Hyung-seok to do what they planned earlier. The sorcerer immediately uses his staff to cast a spell, which creates a magic barrier in the form of an ice wall that stops all the weapons from getting closer. Kira is outraged upon seeing this, and determined to win, he orders his Black Crescent Moon followers to make sure that they kill every single one of the people going on the quest. He wants his men to unleash a large-scale annihilation on Guilford, Zig, and the rest, but before they can initiate their attacks, Guilford boldly warns Kira that the tables are about to turn. The leader of the Red Tiger Company suddenly begins to glow in a bright red color. He grabs his giant sword and instantly goes into berserk mode. Everything around him gets supercharged, and his sword starts to generate a terrifying red lighting as a firestorm forms around him. The insane power emanating from his sword causes the earth to tremble and crack beneath them. The rocks start floating, and it doesn't take long before his sword is completely covered in flames. In an epic display of sheer might, Guilford uses his giant sword to blast a huge inferno at the assassin. But unfortunately, Kira manages to jump high enough to avoid getting caught in the firestorm. However, when he lands on his feet again, he's immediately terrified to see the destruction caused by the mercenaries' attack. The fire was so powerful that it literally burnt the ground and created a wide fissure. Even though he's a bit scared at this point, Kira's psycho side kicks back, and he starts smiling like a maniac once again. He admits that it's an honor to behold such power, and tells Guilford that he might just have won the battle if he was a little bit faster. All of a sudden, a tab pops up in front of Guilford, and he's informed that his berserk mode is being cancelled because his stats are lacking. This comes as a shock to the mercenary, and he becomes worried because he doesn't know why his stats would be decreasing so rapidly. However, he soon realizes the cause of this when he sees another tab, revealing that the effects of something called Hydra's blood have begun to activate in his body. Unfortunately, as a result of Hydra's blood, all of his health and stats are being reduced by 50%. While that's happening, we see Zig smiling and rubbing his chin. He thinks about how he was right about something earlier and calls himself a genius. It turns out that right before the enemy's attack hit him, just one moment before his imminent demise, he quickly opened his inventory and equipped something called the log armor. This armor happens to be shaped like a log, and its job is to protect the entire body of the user. However, there's one drawback, and that's the fact that the user is unable to move because of how heavy it is. As a result, after Zig activated it to save himself from the arrows and spears, he remained trapped inside. Rather than deactivating it to join the fight, Zig mischievously decided to stay in there and wait till the fight was over. After a while, he assumes that the Red Tiger Company must have taken care of everything, so he deactivates the log armor and decides that it's time for him to head back out. Unfortunately, he meets a very unpleasant surprise the moment the shield disappears. The moment Zig comes out of the armor, he sees most of Guilford's men are either dead or severely injured. That's when he realizes that the Red Tiger Company mercenaries are losing to Kira and his assassins. He quickly discovers the reason for this when blood suddenly starts flowing out of his mouth. A tab pops up, informing him that the effects of Hydra's blood have been activated, and just like Guilford earlier, all of Zig's health and stats are decreased by 50%. Zig falls to his knees as the blood drips from his mouth, and that's when he remembers where he first heard about Hydra's blood. Back when he was still Bart's, he learned about the Kadria dungeon, whose boss is a three-headed dragon named Hydra. The move that's currently affecting him is a possible drop from Hydra. It's a powerful poison that can instantly decrease anyone's health and stats by half. With this in mind, Zig begins to wonder if Kira and the Black Crescent Moon poisoned their breakfasts earlier. Zig ponders deeply about it, uncertain about what really happened. He's pretty confused because the breakfast was very tasty, and while he's mentally debating himself, one of Kira's assassins leaps into the air behind him like a ninja, ready to pounce and kill. The assassin is about to stab the absent-minded blacksmith in the back, when a familiar giant sword deflects the strike. As you can see, father-in-law Guilford has come to repay the favor from earlier. He manages to hold off Kira in the air and slices the other assassin with his giant sword. The fact that Guilford is still this much of a threat even with only 50% health and stats makes Kira conclude that he's most definitely a monster. As if that's not bad enough, his attacks aren't working against the big guy, even though he's been poisoned with Hydra's blood. Despite putting up a good fight, Guilford knows that he's currently at a disadvantage. He loses 90 health points, 75, and then 120 in quick succession. To avoid taking any more damage, he decides that they need to evacuate the NPCs. Guilford tries to get away from Kira, but the deadly assassin catches up to him first. Kira appears to get a hold of Guilford's cloak and tells him to stop trying to escape. Meanwhile, Zig is also trying to evade the other assassins who are hot on his tail. Even though he managed to dodge their attacks, he knows that it's only a matter of time before they catch up to him. He's getting tired and taking a lot of damage, so he concludes that he needs to hide somewhere as soon as possible. But in order to do that, he needs to first of all make it into the forest. As such, he increases his pace and desperately runs into the woods, but the Black Crescent Moon assassins follow after him in hot pursuit. The loud clunk sounds of a cart fill the air as Legas frantically drags it along the bumpy roads of the forest. While she's running desperately for her life, we see Kira and his men elsewhere, helping themselves to the spoils of their victory. The Black Crescent Moon assassins take the weapons and items off the bodies of the people they killed, and while they're doing that, Kira keeps watch and supervises them. After a while, the leader of the group calls out to his men, telling them to get ready to move out. With a scowl etched on his face, Kira informs his men that they'll have to ambush the tracking troop the moment they get back. The assassins acknowledge their leader's instructions, and while they're at it, the dead men they killed suddenly start to get erased from the game. All of a sudden, the first-class assassin hears a noise coming from the forest, and is immediately alarmed by the rustling in the bushes. He turns around to see what made the noise, but the perpetrator, who happens to be Legas, quickly hides behind a tree. Still puzzled and disturbed, Kira decides to investigate, so he starts walking toward the tree to find out the source of the noise. Just when he's a few inches from catching Legas, one of his men calls his attention. The assassin informs the master that the tracking troop has returned, and reveals that just as they expected, the troop is heading toward the Rocking Bridge Canyon. Upon hearing this, another cynical smile appears on Kira's face as he can't even hide his delight. In his excitement, he suddenly throws his short curved knife at a tree, and the weapon splits the fat tree in half like it was a tiny piece of paper. Just like a boomerang, the knife flies right back into the killer's hand, and as he catches it with ease, he orders the black crescent moon to head toward the rocking bridge canyon. The first-class assassin assures his followers that they will arrive at the place before the tracking team, and then set a trap by waiting for the team, so they can slaughter all of them. Kira wants to confirm that all of his men understand the assignment, so they all respond loudly in affirmation, while going on one knee and bowing their heads to him like loyal ninjas. Immediately after this, the black crescent moon leaves the scene headed for their new destination, and as they dispatch, Lega's pants heavily and heaves a sigh while clutching her chest anxiously. The scene shifts, and we continue with Lega's running like the wind, dragging her cart along. In the process, she thinks about her near-death experience from a few moments ago, and wonders if the people she saw were really the black crescent moon. The idea seems a bit far-fetched to her because she believes that such a powerful contractor guild that's within the rankings wouldn't just randomly pop up for no reason. However, it becomes more likely when she remembers seeing the NPC's dead bodies and items that were lying around, so she concludes that more than half of the exploration team is most likely already dead. Legas remains deep in thought as she drags her cart along the forest, because she fears that it's going to be game over for her side if the black crescent moon manages to execute another ambush on the tracking troop. With this in mind, she decides that she has to alert the exploration team as soon as possible. Unfortunately, she's stopped in her tracks when a massive monster stomps its foot right in front of her. Legas looks up at the huge creature, feeling so terrified that she just stands there, frozen like a stick of ice. The massive creature suddenly stretches its big hand towards her, which basically implies that it's coming to get her. Sure enough, while the con woman is still stunned and unsure of what to do, the big one-eyed giant starts marching toward her with its huge spiked club in one hand. At this point, Legas is almost 100% sure that she's finished, because she can't even come up with any kind of plan. The only thing she does is scream like a psycho when the ogre roars at her. Eventually, something triggers the survival instincts in her brain just when the monster is about to catch her, so she immediately starts running again, and doesn't leave her cart behind either. For someone who wants to escape, she's really making it more difficult by dragging the heavy load. Legas drags the cart desperately, wondering why there's even a yellow ogre here in the first place. This thought quickly vanishes from her mind though, because the tire of the cart hits a rock, which causes her to fall over in a very embarrassing fashion. After tripping over, she slides across the floor like a penguin on ice, and practically eats dirt in the process. Legas gets up while wincing in pain and covered in bruises. On top of that, the yellow ogre finally catches up to her while she's still trying to regain her balance. Legas stares at the monster in confusion and bewilderment, because it's practically over for her now. A wave of sadness washes over her and her eyes widen as she looks up at the giant beast that's herring toward her to end her life in Arpedia Online. She just sits there helplessly, and like any other person who's about to be viciously murdered, her life begins to flash before her eyes and a particular memory plays back in her mind. In this brief moment leading up to her demise, Legas remembers her life in the real world. As you'd expect, she goes by a different name in real life, and that name is Jisoo. In the memory, we're taken to a time when she was given a bonus by her boss. Jisoo takes the envelope from him, feeling very surprised to receive it, but the boss notices her astonishment and goes ahead to explain that he's giving it to her because she's been working very hard. And now, he wants her to get herself something nice with the reward. Upon hearing this, Jisoo is overjoyed to the point that she can't even pretend. She stares at the envelope, gleefully blushing with a wide smile on her face. And by the time she's counting the money, all she can think about is how she'll combine it with the money she saved up so she can finally afford to pay for quality piano lessons. After work, Jisoo immediately heads down to the NLS Piano Academy. She's about to open the door when she suddenly gets startled by a noise that turns out to be her ringtone. Jisoo picks up the phone while still being a bit surprised, but this emotion quickly turns into worry when the person on the other end starts talking. We find out that the person is Jisoo's sister, who's calling her to tell her some bad news about their father. While Jisoo's sister apologizes to her, she looks at her phone screen and sees a notification, revealing that a huge sum of money has been deducted from her bank account to pay the hospital. Her sister feels very bad about it and tries to apologize, but the generous con woman just tells her not to worry, claiming that money comes and goes all the time. It's pretty obvious that Jisoo feels bad about it, but she manages to hide her emotions and remain strong, especially since the money was used to pay for her father's hospital bills. Later, we see her sitting at her table in class, where she's currently altering the details on her career interest survey as a high school student. Jisoo wanted to attend the Seoul Art University to study piano in the Department of Music, but now that all of the money she saved up to do this has been spent, she's giving up this dream and changing her career interests to global business administration, which she'll study at a different university. After striking off her former dreams, Jisoo stares at the piece of paper, not sure that she's doing the right thing. If she changes her career interests now, she'll be giving up the dreams she's had for a very long time, and all of her extra work would have been for nothing. After thinking long and hard about her future, she finally accepts her fate and gives up her dream. The scene shifts back to the game, and we see that unlike Jisoo, who gave up, this time, Legas maintains a strong will and determination to keep fighting, because she doesn't want to lose again. In the face of death, she says a big fat no, and gets back on her feet with a big rock in her bruised hand. She grips the rock tightly, and thinks about how hard she worked to save all the money she has acquired. As the rage builds up and spreads all over her body, she asks the monster if it knows how much she paid for the quest. And with tears in her eyes, she loudly declares that she's not going to give up again. With a strong resolve to keep fighting and survive, Legas starts hurling rocks at the monster. She misses several times, and even when she gets a hit, the ogre doesn't really feel anything. She cries bitterly and repeatedly yells at the monster to die, as she throws more and more rocks to kill it. She's so sad that she doesn't even look at it while hurling the rocks, and bursts into tears while just begging the monster to die. Not surprisingly, such a beast has no compassion, so even if she cries all day, it won't stop it from tearing her to pieces. The yellow ogre advances toward her and is about to grab her with its big clawed hand, when suddenly, a knight in shining armor arrives. Well, not exactly shining armor, and he's not really a knight either, but at least Zig is still the main hero of this story. He swings on what appears to be a huge vine, and then somehow manages to strike the ogre from above. You can tell it's a very painful strike, because the monster even sheds a tear from its only eye. Thankfully, our hero Blacksmith managed to deliver the devastating hit before the monster could pounce on Legas. Just when she accepts the fact that the monster is going to kill her, it suddenly disappears into thin air because Zig killed it. Legas stares at the monster as it disintegrates into the familiar blue pixels, and almost can't believe her eyes. All that's left of the terrifying beast are its club and other items it carried along. So, when Legas sees this and finally realizes that it's gone, she falls to her knees and sheds even more tears because she's relieved that her journey in Arpedia isn't over just yet. While she's on the ground, our hero lands behind her, asking to confirm if the ogre is really dead. Zig gets back up and is about to start talking about how he finally caught the monster, but he keeps quiet when he turns around and sees his former nemesis crying like a hopeless little puppy. The blacksmith turns to her, feeling very confused, and asks her what she's doing sobbing on the ground. Legas doesn't even say anything, and instead just sits there and continues crying. While the former master and slave are having a very awkward reunion, the scene cuts back to 30 minutes ago. We see the two assassins who were hot on Zig's heels, searching the woods to find him. As it turns out, the blacksmith was somehow able to cleverly evade the killers, so now they're just walking in circles, wondering which way he went. Eventually, one of the assassins hears a noise coming from deeper in the forest, so he informs his colleague and they immediately run in there, thinking that it might be Zig. They both run past our hero, unable to see him hiding right under their noses all along. The assassins pay no attention to the only cut tree around, so after they're gone, our hero casually deactivates his log armor and we see where he has been hiding in plain sight. At this point, Zig is covered in dirt and sweating profusely to show just how difficult the last couple hours have been for him. He heaves a sigh of relief and is glad to say that he's finally lost the killer on his tail. Now that he's survived them, he talks about how the next thing he needs to do is find a greater antidote. But before he can finish the thought, a loud stomp interrupts him. Our boy doesn't even need to turn around before realizing that he's in trouble, because judging from that sound, he can already imagine what kind of creature is standing behind him. Just to confirm, he turns around slowly and looks up at the giant yellow ogre smiling at him like a creep. He can tell that it's not a friendly smile though, because the creature is very much ready to devour its prey. This point is proven quickly when the beast starts drooling all over the place like a dog in front of some chicken. A tab pops up to inform Zig that the hungry creature is a yellow ogre, which is a rare mob that appears in the highlands of Nemesis Mountains. The giant monster leaps into the air in an attempt to smash the blacksmith into the ground, and while it's in the air, Zig thinks about how to face it. He remembers from experience that it's better not to fight a yellow ogre, because it has a very high attack power relative to its level. The ogre finally lands its powerful hit but ends up missing, because our boy effortlessly dodges by grabbing onto a vine and swings away. Even though it's not advisable to take on such a beast, it's recommended that you catch the yellow ogre because it drops greater antidotes. However, this is only the case for users who are skilled in combat. By holding himself up with one hand and his sword in the other, Zig flexes his strength and smirks at the beast as he prepares to use the info he extracted from the Nemesis Mountains notice board to kill the ogre. With this in mind, our hero proceeds to unleash a barrage of attacks on the monster. From experience, he knows that it doesn't matter how strong a monster's attack is, because it's useless if they can't even hit him. Zig swings into action, literally, and lands a devastating blow on the ogre's head, which takes away 50 whole points from its health. Then, he strikes again to take out 70 points, and then 65, 30, and just goes on like that, until the yellow ogre is at the verge of death. The powerful attack that removes 120 life points turns out to be the last straw, because the ogre starts running away like a middle school kid being confronted by bullies. It even cries as it retreats, but our hero just swings after it like Tarzan with a grudge, yelling for the ogre to stop running away. A few moments later, after the little beatdown, we see Zig drinking a green potion from a bottle, which turns out to be the greater antidote he was talking about earlier. It's a cure-all antidote that can cure any kind of condition in the game. We catch up with our boy after he saves Legas from the yellow ogre, and while he chugs the green liquid down, Legas calls him a liar, refusing to believe that he actually killed the huge beast. At this point, our hero must be sick and tired of everyone underestimating him all the time, but it's a good thing he always manages to prove them wrong. Seeing the condescending and disbelieving look on her face, Zig just laughs and confirms that he killed the beast by pointing at the new title above his head, which boldly identifies him as an ogre vanquisher. Gaining this title is no easy feat, as you know, because you don't just get it by killing the ogre. Instead, only someone who strikes fear into the yellow ogre's heart can acquire it. After showing her his new title, he claims that even though his attack level is low, all he has to do is to keep whacking the ogre until it dies. While he's casually revealing this, Legas is more concerned with the fact that he was able to kill such a monster, because it shouldn't be possible for him to have such combat power as a blacksmith. For some reason, she's very annoyed about the whole situation, when she should actually be grateful to him for saving her life. Zig, on the other hand, is pretty oblivious to her envy and anger, because he's more interested in celebrating his healing after drinking the greater antidote. The manipulative con woman watches him jump around happily like a kid, and concludes that his special skills will come in handy because things will be easier for her with him by her side. She cuts his joy short by suddenly telling him that they have some work to do. Our hero is both shocked and confused to hear her say such a thing after he just saved her life, so he expresses his confusion, and Legas asks him if he wants to complete the quest too. Our boy doesn't even need to answer the question to confirm her suspicions, so the trickster reveals that she's come up with a plan to wipe out the Black Crescent Moon. The scene shifts, and we see the players participating in the quest, arriving at a narrow rope bridge. The players stand there with their supplies and carts, waiting for their leader to make the first move, and soon, Guilford arrives with his men. One of them points out that they've finally reached the bridge, and claims that they're almost at their destination. However, Guilford reveals that they're not, and then suddenly swings his giant sword at what seems to be thin air. But when the flames knock Kira out and make him visible again, we realize that the assassin was actually hiding in plain sight. The impact from the old man's mighty weapon sends the first-class assassin flying back a few feet, but he stays on his feet and shakes off the pain. Kira admits that he's impressed with Guilford for sensing him, because he's very sure that he hid his presence well. Intrigued by Guilford's ability, the psycho assassin asks him how exactly he managed to find him, but the old man just scoffs before claiming that he's simply more experienced. Hearing this brutal burn, the crazy killer just snaps his fingers and tells Guilford not to act so tough, and claims that the Red Tiger Company is about to get destroyed by his army. The moment he snaps his fingers, hundreds of arrows suddenly appear in the sky, raining down on Guilford and his men. They all look up and see the speeding arrows racing toward them. Like the brave leader he is, Guilford uses his sword to slash all the weapons he can, but unfortunately, there's only so much he can destroy, and as a result, some of his men get brutally injured. After surviving the first wave of attack, the old man calls out to his trusty mage, Hyung-seok, and orders him to create the ice wall barrier as he did before. But unfortunately, before the sorcerer can cast the spell, one of Kira's assassins appears behind him and slits his throat with a dagger. Witnessing the gruesome death of one of his men, a heartbroken Guilford screams in pain. But while he's still grieving the loss, the villain repeats the same move by appearing right in front of him and stabbing him in the chest. Unfortunately, this time, Zig isn't here to save him, and as a result, the great Guilford of the Storm falls to the ground, losing his sword in the process. After the old man collapses, the psycho assassin mocks him, claiming that he's not as great as they say, and prepares to deliver the finishing blow to end Guilford's gaming life for good. However, just when he's about to kill the old mercenary, he is distracted by the noise coming from a cart speeding toward him. Kira is taken aback by all the commotion, and then he sees our boy pushing the cart toward him, waving and mocking him by calling him a petty thief. As you'd expect, the first-class assassin is very irritated and enraged to see the confrontational blacksmith again, but because of Zig's shocking entrance, he's a bit stunned, so he just stands in a spot, curious to see what our hero is going to do next. Using the momentum from his run, the blacksmith generates a lot of speed on the cart, so he pushes it toward the assassin and tells him that it's a present. As the wagon races toward him, Kira just uses his powerful dagger to destroy it, but what he doesn't realize is the fact that he also smashes a bottle containing a purple potion in the process. The liquid spills all over him, but he doesn't even notice because he's too busy smiling smugly and feeling invincible. After the cool display, Kira is covered in the strange liquid, but he still doesn't notice since he's more concerned with gloating and trying to intimidate our favorite blacksmith. The crazy killer confronts Zig, revealing that he heard he luckily escaped earlier, and he also admits that he didn't expect the blacksmith to come back on his own. You can't blame Kira for thinking this way though, because he probably doesn't know that Zig is the main character in this story. And right now, the sorry loser is about to discover why this blacksmith is the main man. The first-class assassin thinks Zig's return is a very stupid move, so he concludes that our hero definitely has a death wish. Unfortunately for Kira, he quickly realizes that he's the stupid one in the picture when he starts to feel weird and smells a strange scent all over his body. He starts to panic while wondering what the scent is, even though Zig already told him what it is earlier. Guess he doesn't like the present very much, which is a bummer because that's not the only surprise our hero has in store for him. While the psycho killer is distracted, our boy charges at him with another attack, calling it a bonus for the present, and then proceeds to hurl a flaming bottle at him. As it turns out, Zig's aim has become pretty impressive unlike before, because the bottle lands right on Kira's foot and shatters. The moment the bottle breaks and the liquid inside is exposed, our hero yells out to signal the next phase of his plan. And all of a sudden, several huge explosions follow, blowing up the psycho killer in the Black Moon Crescent. The fire consumes the first-class assassin, and he can't do anything but yell at the blacksmith as he meets his demise. The large-scale explosions turn the place into a massive ruin as smoke and ash cover the sky. And in the midst of all this, the trickster who came up with the plan just stands and watches on, relieved that her dreams of completing the quest are still alive. We see several wooden barrels with taps lined up on Lega's cart, and she reveals that the content of each vessel is something called blast spirits, which in other words, practically means liquid explosives. While slightly opening the tap on one of the barrels, she informs our hero that she brought the blast spirits on the quest as a trade item, because the dwarves seem to love it for some reason. As the tap opens, the scent fills the air, and she confirms that one can tell that the liquor is insanely strong just by the smell. A single drop of the blast spirit falls from the tap, and as they reach the ground, Legas prepares to demonstrate how strong the liquor actually is. Even though the smell is already very strong, she feels that Zig would get a better idea of what she's talking about by showing him, so she strikes a matchstick. And once it lights up, she tosses the burning stick over to the single drop. The moment the fire touches the liquid, a mini explosion occurs right at their feet, and the con woman confirms that even a single drop will explode every time it comes in contact with fire. It's based on this little science experiment that her killer plan will be executed, so she proceeds to explain how she wants to take Kira and his minions down with it. Legas suggests that if they can find a way to throw all the barrels at Kira and cover him with the liquid, then they can light him up and watch as the massive boom leads to satisfying fireworks. The trickster has a lot of faith in this plan, because she feels that even if the psycho killer is a ranker, he'll definitely die from a single blow because he's an assassin. She feels that the plan is a good one, but our favorite blacksmith is a little skeptical about it, and this makes her a bit upset. Pissed off by his reaction, she snaps and asks him what he thinks about it. Zig explains that even if they somehow manage to get rid of Kira, the issue of his many followers will still be in the picture, because they'll be out of black spirits by then. Hearing this point, she stutters for a bit, implying that she didn't consider that part of the plan before. But then, she suddenly blurts out that they can just blow the assassins up along with their crazy leader. Sounds like a good plan still, but Zig points out that Kira is too proud. He even calls him a peacock to make his point, and explains that there's no way he's going to stick around with the rest of his followers. With this in mind, our boy suggests that the first-class assassin is most likely going to climb out of his hiding place by himself, just so he can show off. Even though she totally understands his point, she still feels that if they can get rid of Kira, then the rest of them will be taken care of as well. But before she can even say this, Zig cuts her off and makes it clear that such a mission cannot be completed by just eliminating the leader. And the reason he thinks this way is because there are just too many of the Black Crescent Moon assassins. The fact that he keeps countering her ideas is starting to get her upset. So, once again, she snaps at him, angrily asking him what he thinks they should do, and challenging him to come up with his own good ideas. Our boy can sense the tension from the tone of her voice, so he calmly tells her to think about the situation. He then explains that Kira and his men are going to be hiding somewhere before attacking, just like they did before. With this fact already being established, Zig believes that their plan should be simple, and then suggests that they go to all the places where the scumbags are hiding first, and light them up like fireworks. As our boy comes up with this brilliant plan, the scene shifts for a bit and we see Legas running away from the explosion, looking a bit surprised that the plan worked just like our hero predicted. Anyway, we return to the flashback and see where our hero puts the finishing touches on the master plan by explaining that he'll tell her the location where the canyon could collapse. After that, he claims that he'll give her a signal and tells her that she should blow up the alcohol barrels when he does. The scene switches back to the moment Legas is running from the flames, and she still doesn't look happy even though the plan worked. In fact, she looks upset that Zig's brilliant plan turned out well, because apparently she underestimated him quite a bit. For starters, she can't believe that he thought about blowing up the canyon before her, and the fact that somehow managed to vanquish the yellow ogre makes her so annoyed that she starts to wonder who this overachieving blacksmith really is. Meanwhile, while she's beating herself up by competing with our hero, the blacksmith in question watches the massive and honestly incredible explosion in awe. He's almost overwhelmed by the unbelievable destruction he's witnessing, because he probably didn't expect it to look like the end of the world or something. His eyes glimmer with powerful sparks as he looks up at the fiery sky, feeling proud of himself, even though he admits that was a bit doubtful the plan would work. As he stands in the middle of the hellscape that just formed, he lets out a small laugh and thinks about how his grain skill keeps getting more fun the more he learns about it. The uncontrollable flames consume the first-class assassin, and Zig chuckles even more before deciding that he'll look into his new grain skill even more once he's done with the trade route quest. Our boy is about to start walking away from the burning place when suddenly the psycho killer starts moving toward him while still covered in flames. You can tell how insanely hot the fire is when a puff of smoke comes out as Kira opens his mouth to talk. Seriously, how the fuck is this guy still not dead? Anyway, he walks up to our boy and confronts him, asking him where he's going. As you'd expect, Zig is surprised to even hear someone talk behind him, because no one should be able to survive such an inferno. However, he's in Arpedia Online, and it appears this villain in particular might just be immune to fire. Before our boy can even turn around completely, this flaming assassin charges at him like a human meteor. But thankfully, he sees the killer coming, so he quickly dodges the attack. Like an actual rocket, Kira flies past our hero and misses. While he's crashing into something else, Zig appears to be absolutely stunned and baffled that the assassin is still alive even after getting blown up. At this point, he starts to fear that Kira might be an unkillable monster like many other rankers. And while he's busy freaking out, the assassin in question turns around with the flames spreading all over his body, and then promises to make our hero regret his life. We thought Kira was crazy before, but when he turns around, the scary look on his face gives us an idea of the true psychopath he actually is. With smoke leaving both corners of his mouth, his eyes glow with a terrifying red color, and he grabs his two curved daggers in preparation for another deadly battle. Elsewhere, we see Guilford and the other players finally crossing the rope bridge, and as the leader of the exploration, he shouts for everyone to move slowly and carefully, instructing that NPCs and beginner users be allowed to cross the bridge first. After giving the orders, the old man drops his fearless demeanor and whispers to Scarface, revealing that he doesn't know what caused the explosion, but admits that he's thankful for it because he'd have been dead otherwise. On that note, he suggests that they get moving before the black crescent moon catches up with them again. Just then, the familiar white-haired merchant runs toward the bridge, yelling out to get Guilford's attention. The old man turns around, and when she finally gets to him, she falls to her knees in exhaustion so she can catch her breath first. While she's doing that, Guilford recognizes her and tries to say something, but she quickly cuts him off with a very scary statement, claiming that it's now or never. Legis tells him that they have to cross the bridge right away before the assassins come after them, and upon hearing this, the gears in Guilford's head start to turn till he concludes that she must be the one who caused the massive explosions. At this point, she appears to be getting impatient, so she quickly confirms his guess and also informs him that the plan was a collaboration with our hero, the famous blacksmith named Zig. The old man is surprised to hear that name again, and Scarface interrupts him, pointing out that the others have crossed the bridge, so he tries to suggest that they get moving as well. However, before he can do this, the red-eyed mercenary declares that he's going to wait there until our boy arrives. Both Legis and Scarface are shocked by his statement, so the merchant tries to change his mind by explaining that the killers are going to arrive soon, and that it's best if they cross immediately. Despite her attempts to convince him, Guilford tells her that the blacksmith saved him twice, and that he's now in his debt, even though he never wanted to. As a result of this, his pride and honor won't allow him to just leave without trying to help the person who saved his life. Meanwhile, back in the hellscape, we see our boy holding his own against the killer within the tall flames. Just like before, Zig uses his very efficient arm break skill to destroy one of Kira's daggers, and as the broken blade falls to the ground, the psycho assassin realizes that it's the same skill our hero used against him earlier. As the fire surrounds them, the brave blacksmith takes a battle stance with his sword again,